شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
مؤمنين مؤمنات, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We're continuing our topic and discussion of Muslim identity, Shia identity, and how we can go about solidifying and strengthening that identity in regards to some of the issues that we face in our lives, especially living here in the West. We've talked about a few topics so far. The first night we talked about Azza and Azadari and the way that a Shia expresses their identity in different ways. We talked about how and why sometimes we have this identity crisis on the second night, why we lose ourselves because of, let's say, an issue in our tarbiyah, in our parenting, what happens at home, maybe issues between our parents or grandparents or brothers and sisters. We talked about the issue of social media and education and the general society that we're living around that is promoting different ideas which are antithetical to our true identity. Then we said important fundamental notion for every Muslim, and especially for a Shia, is the idea of Tawheed. Right? Tawheed, which normally we translate as believing in one God, or monotheism. Although that translation has some issues, but just for out of the sake of time, I'm not going to go through that discussion. So what we started with last night was, we asked the question, there's all these individuals who say that, look, you people who believe in God, you religious people, you don't have any evidence for your belief. No scientific evidence, no rational evidence, no logical evidence. And for us, sometimes we hear this and we don't have a reply. So sometimes that can weaken our iman and weaken our faith. So the first thing we did is to say, look, we are not supposed to have, high-level philosophical information all the time. We said normally how human beings function in our daily lives. We don't go around demanding scientific, empirical evidence for everything. We don't demand, rational philosophical proofs. The way we live our lives, just like right now, everybody believes to be awake. We eat, we drink, everything we're doing is based on intuition. We just live our lives like that. We don't need 100% super philosophical certainty all the time. So, if somebody does present you with a question, don't let it put you in doubt. Say, look, as long as you have that itminan and that yaqeen in your heart, the iman is there, that's fine. And you can tell the individual, hey, if you are interested in studying this and researching, then go ask somebody who's a specialist. Right? Don't ask some random individual. So you don't have to feel ashamed in that regard. Now, because in this society, as early as grade school now, maybe middle school, high school, because now the majority of individuals are pushing the sort of atheistic tendencies there, most of us now feel like we need to know what the proofs are. So we said, you know what, we can't offer these proofs. So we started by talking about what would be a sort of semi-scientific idea. This idea of proving God through this argument of design and order. And when we look out and we look in the world, we look out in reality, everything that we see is ordered and designed. We don't see facade, we don't see chaos. Everything is based on cause and effect. It's all moving in one direction. And this is the same way that science needs this, otherwise you can't do science. If you don't have cause and effect, if you can't offer scientific proofs, then you don't have science anymore. So there's all these assumed, presumed laws sitting behind the universe that people take for granted. And we said, look, we Muslims, or Christians or Jews, or anybody who believes in God, we don't take it for granted. We know that there's something beyond this. Maybe we can't give you the full explanation, that's okay, but that's enough for us. For the average person, that's why I believe in God. Because when I see everything here, it's orderly creation, the organization, the nature of everything, the beauty. This can't come by accident. It's highly, highly irrational for this to come by accident. We've never seen anything in history to ever spontaneously just pop into existence. Everything has been because of A, B, C, cause and effect. So this is a way that science doesn't push us to disprove God, but it more likely proves and pushes us towards a belief in some sort of designer or creator. So this is the first thing we discussed. If you can recite Salawat ala Muhammad, go on. We also emphasize that it's important to remember science is not in the business of telling us facts. It doesn't give you 100% truth. That's not what it does. 100% truth and certainty is for other sciences, right? 1 + 1 = 2 in math, that's not change, right? Nobody's going to come up with a new theory and then, hey, guess what? 1 + 1 = 3 now. No, that doesn't happen. Or in logic, right? If A is B and B is C, then A = C. That's a logical sort of idea. So that's studied in mantiq and logic. That doesn't change either. These all are metaphysical ideas. These don't change. Science doesn't work with that. Science works based on experimentation, observation, over and over, rigorous tests over and over again. And it keeps changing. They say improving. Fine, yeah, improving, changing. It'll never give you a full-on theory for everything. It doesn't do that. That's not what science is about. The problem is that in school here, they teach you science, but they don't teach you the theory of science. They don't teach you the philosophy of science. In the same way, they don't teach us the philosophy of math either, right? We all know that, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. Why? Who decided that? Why does 1 + 1 = 2? The average person has no idea, but this is something that, when you get to those higher levels of philosophy, that's what they ask. What does 1 even mean? What does 0 mean? Right? That's higher level, philosophy. So, what we want to go to now is, after having those discussions, we said, look, with this proof, this argument of design by organization and creation and everything, there are some holes there, right? It's not the strongest thing that's there. It's been used throughout time for different reasons. But generally, it wasn't used by philosophers to prove to people that God exists. That wasn't the purpose of it. It was like an aid. It's just a little helpful thing. So usually they use it for analogies. Because the whole idea is, if God already exists in your heart, God exists in your fitrah, the knowledge of God is in your soul, then all I have to do is give you a reminder, right? And that reminder is, look at the beauty, and then let's write. فَانْظُرْ كَيْفَ كَانُوا عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Allah says, "Siru fil ard." Go look out in the world, go see how things are, you'll come to the conclusion that Allah is there. It will be very obvious. Only used for Arabs then, and then for us now. But because of now the growing trend of atheism, and now everybody has become sort of what we call armchair philosopher, right? There's all these YouTube videos and arguments that, no, this is weak. And partially they're correct, right? There are some holes and weaknesses and gaps in that proof and argument. Okay, do we have anything that's actually foolproof? That's 100% solid and can't be broken? That's based on logic, that there's no Quran there. Because we can't use the Quran, God exists, right? That's not going to work. We shouldn't be using hadith necessarily. The same way that if a Christian were to tell you that, hey, I can prove that the Bible's true, how do you know? Because the Bible says it's true. No, that's not how it works. You have to prove to me outside of the Bible that the Bible has truth. So if I tell you that, oh, God says in the Quran that He's there, well, that's not. So we need something outside. So yes, do we have rational, philosophical proofs that God exists? Yes, we do, and that's what I want to discuss tonight. If you can recite it, Salawat ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So a few disclaimers before we start. So, number one, obviously I know, there's obviously noise, kids are running around and playing. And I know that is bothersome to some of you. For me personally, it's not bothersome. I just want to say, I don't have a problem with it. I actually enjoy it. I think it's a good thing when the young children are able to run around and play freely in a center, in a masjid. I think it's good because they build a loving connection. For me, when I was, let's say, grabbed and forced to sit down with my parents and just listen to something which wasn't even in English, or I was told to do this, do that, and just, that strictness was there, I got disconnected from the center. I got disconnected from Islam based on that. Harshness is never going to give you and yield love. Strictness is not going to yield a connection to the heart. It doesn't work like that. You might force that person, to come all the time, but they won't do it lovingly. And what are we after? We're after true ma'rifat of Allah, right? We want that loving relationship with Allah. Isn't that what everybody wants? I don't want to just, come here and cry for Imam Hussein because I'm forced. I want to do it because my heart calls out to him, that's why. When I offer namaz and salah, I want to be able to connect with Allah that way. Well, if somebody just forces you and grabs you and pulls you, just read these words, that's not going to build a loving connection. But yes, I know that sometimes, it's tough, there's sound and screaming and it's tough to focus. Well, let's look at the two different capacities here. We have kids, right? They're going, especially 0 to 7, their job is to play, right? According to hadith and even child developmental psychology, children are meant to play, to be free. That's what they're meant to do. They're not meant to sit down and be quiet and do homework. That's not what their job is. Children are meant to have fun. Now for us as adults, our job is to be able to use our focus, right? So if there are sounds and other things going on, our job is to use that tamarkus, that quwwah, that power that we have, and try to focus as best as possible, right? So what we do is, we have the right to sit in this center and try our best to benefit from these teachings from the ulama, from the Quran and Hadith. That's what we're trying to do together, right? So we have that right, we have that haqq. At the same time, the children here have a haqq as well. They have a haqq to be able to play, to be free. Now, we have to make sure that we establish our right to perform azab, but we can't violate somebody else's right in the process, right? When you're going after your right, go. We deserve it. But don't trample upon somebody else's right, especially a child's right. Because later on, you know what, everybody comes to, every time I go, any center, any masjid, anywhere I've traveled, whenever, just like I mentioned before, right? I ask for suggestions, give me topics. Every single time they say, oh, please help us, our youth are misguided, our youth are not coming. I said, okay, let me ask you this. In the center, what were you doing? Were they forced to come here? Were you sitting them down? Did they build a levy connection? What's going on? And usually, I already know the answer. It's a rhetorical question, but I know what the answer is. I said, well, they don't want to come here because you pushed them away in the first place, or you forced them to sit down. Why would somebody want to come? If you just grab somebody by the hand and force them to sit, like, why would I want to do this? So it's going to be very tough for them to develop that loving relationship. In addition, these sessions, like a typical majlis, and I'll tell you, this is like a personal. Right now we have people of all ages and all backgrounds sitting here, right? Some people, right? Some kids, probably 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we have some, shuyukh and people who are older, who are maybe 70 or 80 years old. Can you imagine in any other setting where somebody has to address a crowd where you have 5-year-olds and you have 89-year-olds? It's not going to work. It's going to be very, very tough. So we have to understand too that the mimbar, or traditional speeches, are meant for a certain crowd. So if, for example, I say, look, I'm going to only address the kids, and the adults will say, okay, well, it's not for me then. If I address the adults, then the kids will say, well, this is not for me. So we have to figure out how do we start balancing these things out, right? It's going to be very tough. And I'm glad that there's volunteers who are there to play and do arts and crafts with the kids. That's wonderful. Alhamdulillah, that's a good thing. So we have to make sure that if we want them involved, and yes, set up something fun for them to do, volunteer your time if you can, offer whatever you can. But at the end of the day, we are the ones that have the ability to try to focus as much as possible. We can't demand a child who doesn't have that ability to focus and sit and be quiet, because they don't have the ability. We have the ability to try our best to increase our focus, right? Or, let's just say that, whatever, you miss a point in the lecture. Let's say that happens. You can come up to me afterwards and tell me to do it again, right? I can do that. Or, even while I'm going to the point, look, I didn't hear you, can you repeat it? I'll do that too, there's nothing wrong with that. But, can you repeat a child having a disconnection in the center? You'll never repeat that. The minute they disconnect from the center and they have a traumatic experience, I'm going to use those words, in the center, you can't recreate that moment. The minute they feel that trauma here, you can't make up for that. Right? You've torn a little part of them away from Allah, and now you can't get it back. Yeah, you don't hear a point, you got to repeat a point, we can recreate that, we can redo that. But you can never recreate a child. So keep that in mind, inshallah. Again, this is just a friendly advice for all of us, myself, I'm a parent of 3 girls. So this is something that's very tough, I know. But the idea of being a parent is if we want to teach our children how to perform tazkiyah to nafs and destroy their ego, the only way they'll learn that is if you and I as parents are the first ones to destroy our egos first. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Okay, no more noise now, okay? See what happens? Okay, I have my first one maybe. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So that was the first disclaimer, long one. Second one is this. I want to go through these philosophical points. This proof is something that's usually taught in the Hawza. It's one of the first elementary proofs that's taught, right? Burhan, Imkan wa wujud. This is not something that's normally taught to lay individuals. But again, I'm saying because of the nature and what's going on in society, I think most people, at least we should hear it. to know the fact that we do have a fully philosophical rational proof for God's existence. But it's not going to be as easy as the other one, right? This is going to be a bit more philosophically rigorous. It's going to be a bit tougher, right? So you have to put on your kind of philosopher hat for a little while, right? I'll give some analogies as best as possible, but you should know, anytime an analogy is given, it takes a little bit away from the strength of the proof. But I'm going to give analogies so we understand, and then I'll try my best to just give the terminology, to water it down so that it's understood by all of us, right? But if it's not understood, you can either ask when we break for Q&A, before the Maqtal and Masail, or afterwards. I'm here, so we can discuss it afterwards as well. I think that's all enough disclaimers for tonight then, right? Okay. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I had a third disclaimer. I'll mention it after the proof though. It's okay. No. When we think about anything that exists, anything that's here, right? There's two ideas in our mind. When something is here, like this mic is here, this laptop is here, I'm here, you're here. We're all here. We exist, right? We're mawjood. We also know that the opposite of that is when something doesn't exist. Right? Okay, so we know that, for example, horses, they exist, they're real. But unicorns, no, they don't exist. That's made up. It's make-believe, it's imaginary. That's not real. Okay? For everything that is real, that exists, you can ask a question about what are its qualities? What are its sifat? Its khususiyat? What is this thing that we're talking about that's real, right? And you can describe it in many different ways. So, for example, let's say I were to take this water and I spill it on this table over here, right? So now we can say, look, this table that exists, this table is wet, right? Now, when the table's wet, we would all agree, right? If I spill water, I don't want to do it obviously because I want the water. But if I spill water on it, we'd all agree, the table's wet now. So the question is this: we can all describe and agree, yes, without a doubt, 100% this table is wet. You can ask another question: is that table always wet? Is that an essential trait and characteristic of the table? Or did it get it by accident? Did something else come and make the table wet? So which is it? You can answer if you want. Yeah. Something, the water is what made the table wet. Tables by themselves, wood doesn't have the quality of wetness, right? Water by itself gives out the idea of wetness, right? You know, there's this whole thing back in the day of, I don't know, it was like last year, 2 years ago, is water wet? I'm not going into that, but water has this quality of wetness, and anytime water goes on something, it makes it wet. It goes on my clothes, it'll make that wet. It goes on a table, it'll make it wet. It goes on food, it'll make it nasty and soggy, right? We don't want water on food. So water, whenever it's put on something else, it gives off its quality too. Shares the quality. With me so far? Right? Let's do something else. Let's think about chai. Chai, by default, if you just brew some chai, right? Tea bag and water, tea leaves and water, what flavor, what type of taste does it have? It's bitter, right? Normally chai, whatever tea there is, it's bitter. So if I give you a cup of chai, and you take a sip, and it tastes sweet, what do you automatically know about that tea? Somebody said sugar, I heard that. Sugar's been added. And if we had, let's say, a machine, what is it, a blockbuster machine or atom smash or whatever, if you were to spin that fast enough, you could take out all the granules and all the particles of sugar if you wanted to, and that chai, that tea would go back to its original state, which is being bitter, right? You could do that. The same way, right? Something gets wet, you can wipe it up and get rid of it. Something becomes sweet, like milk or sugar, like milk or water, whatever, or chai, you can take out that sugar too. By default, they don't have those qualities of being sweet. Or again, sometimes we add salt to food. What? That makes it salty. Salt, does anything have to be added to salt to make it salty? No. Salt, whenever you have salt, by default, it's an essential quality that it's salty. Sugar, did somebody else come and give sugar its sweetness? No. Sugar by itself is already sweet. Water by itself is already wet. You see where I'm going with this, I hope, right? When you're thinking about qualities and traits and sifat for anything in existence, either you got it from somewhere else, it got the quality from outside, like you borrowed it or stole it or took it, or it has the quality by itself and it always has it by itself. It's mine, it's my quality. The quality of fire is heat. Nothing else comes and gives it. The quality of salt is to be salty. The quality of oil is to be oily. And if those objects come in contact with something else, it'll pass on those qualities to the other thing. Okay. Did I get everything good? You didn't get lost so far, did you? If you're with me, recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That's a cheap speaker treat. Because if I the thing I said, if you're not with me, recite salawat, I'll probably still do it anyway. Which would prove to me that either you're paying attention or not paying attention. I don't know which. But, okay. So now, all that stuff. Another quality that you and I have right now is wujud. You and I exist, right? Unless you're insane, you know that you exist, right? You know that you're here. I'm mawjood, you're mawjood. We're all here. We exist. We're real. The question is this: were we always here? Did we always have wujud? Did we always have existence? No. We didn't always have it. It came from somewhere else, right? Just like a table that's wet, you're like, okay, water must have been spilled on that. Or you have a drink that's become sweet, but yeah, sugar was put in there. Or you have food that's salty, salt was put in there. Or you see oil was spilled on it. We ask the question and say, look, we all know that everything that exists right now doesn't have the quality of existence by itself. So where did they get the quality from? Where did they get the existence from? Where did they get wujud from? Everything that we understand in this world is called a mumkin al-wujud. It's a contingent being. Contingent just means it's waiting for somebody else to come and flip a switch for it. We were, for example, off sitting in, like, let's say, non-existence, and then somebody had to flip a switch to existence, right? And you might say, oh, my parents, right? It's because of that and I was born. No. Because for them, did they always exist? No, they didn't. So they also needed to borrow from somebody else too. Every single thing is just borrowing wujud from somebody else. It doesn't happen by itself. Okay? So then the question is, okay, if we don't have the quality of wujud by itself, then where did this quality come from? In the same way that if you take that same cup of chai, you taste that it's sweet, you're like, oh, there's sugar inside of here. And when I know that it's sweet, I know that sugar by itself has that quality and it passed on the quality to something else. Nothing else gave that quality to sugar. Nothing else gives salt its saltiness. Nothing else gives oil its oiliness. We say that, look, in order for existence, for all of us to be here, for anything to exist at all, any mumkin al-wujud to be here, you need something known as wajib. You need something that by itself has the quality of existence. That is infinitely and perfectly, eternally existent. That didn't get existence from the outside, it always had. And this is what we say, Allah is wajib al-wujud. God is wajib al-wujud. God is that entity, that being which gives everything else existence. Not life, we're saying existence. And it's a different quality altogether. I'm going to say it one more time. If you can recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Either something has the quality by itself, it's always going to be there inside, like fire and heat, this and that. Or let me give you a non-abstract or an abstract example. How many sides does a triangle have? 3. No, I heard some 3s, right? They're very quiet 3s, it's okay. They're very humble people here, you don't want to raise your voice, it's okay. You can raise your voice here, it's okay, right? The kids are doing it, you can do it too, I'll give you a ijazah, it's okay. So, yeah. Okay, now somebody said, look, I saw a 4-sided triangle the other day, what would you do? Well, you probably slap him in the face, I think. Like, what's wrong with you? But what do they put in your chai? That's what you're probably asking, right? Like, no, if you have a triangle, you don't even need to see it. You know that, look, if it's a triangle, it's got to have 3 sides. That quality will always be a part of the triangle. That's it. Right? So we're saying that in order for this place to have existence, we didn't have it ourselves, we know that. We were non-existent. We have to have it from somewhere. So we said that since we are almost like we are outside, and we know that, hey, by default, none of us are sweet, something had to be put into us. This existence had to come from outside. And whatever it came from has this quality by default. Same way sugar is sweet by default, there's something out there, some existence which has existence by default and gives it to everything else. That is known as wajib al-wujud. It has wujud as its own quality by itself. Because, you know, and this already answers the question that Bertrand Russell and many others asked, oh, where did God come from? Who created him? So you're not paying attention to our proofs. That's your problem. We didn't say God was made. We said, look at our ontological or proof by being. We're not talking about mumkin al-wujud, is what you're talking about. We are talking about two things, two different beings with qualities. One of them has to get it from somewhere else, and the other one has it by default. And we're saying it's impossible logically for everything to be in this group of waiting for something else. You can't just have infinite of those. You have to have at least one which has that quality by default. Well, we've not used one ayah of Quran, no hadith. I didn't appeal to your emotions. We didn't use any signs either. This was pure logical deduction, Aristotelian logic. That's all this was. Saying that, look, when things exist, either they get a quality from outside or they have it themselves. We all got existence from outside. So, therefore, this quality has to come from somewhere else. You have to terminate this idea with one being which has this quality by default. And that's what's known as wajib al-wujud. So this burhan, this proof is known as burhan of imkan and wujud, of possibility or contingency and necessity. There's one thing that necessarily, without a doubt, has to have the quality of wujud. Always it has to have. God has to have this. He didn't get it from somebody else, He's got that. Let me give you another analogy, I think it might make more sense if you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Have any of you ever seen a relay race before? Right? Relay race? Nobody's answering. A relay race, normally, right, is there's multiple runners, let's say like 5 runners, and they each have a certain amount of the track they have to go in. So you have a guy at the start, or a girl at the start, they go a little while, and they usually have a baton in their hand. They pass that baton to the second person. The second person goes, like maybe a quarter mile, whatever. They pass it to number 3. Number 3 goes and passes it to number 4, etc. Right? Yeah? You've heard of this concept, I hope, right? Okay. Good. So now, let's say, all of a sudden, we, for some reason, we're bored, we go into a relay race, right? Or we go out to, let's say, the field out there, we see that there's a relay race going on. And you see that, hey, there's somebody with the number 3, and they have a baton in their hand. What do you automatically know from that? So, okay, this number 3. Even if we go up and ask them, hey, don't ask them in the middle of the race, obviously they're not going to answer you, but you ask number 3, hey, where'd you get your baton from? They say, I got it from number 2. Okay, so number 3 was always waiting for number 2 before they could start running, right? Number 3 can't move until they get the baton in their hand. Once number 2 comes, then number 3 gets to run. So, okay, fine, let's go to number 2. Hey, number 2, where'd you get the baton from? How did you start the race? Well, I was waiting for number 1. Number 1 gave it to me, then I got to start. Okay, cool. Hey, number 1, where'd you get it from? Nobody. I was the one who had the baton all the time. I started everything off, and I'm the one who gave it to everybody else. I started this whole thing out. Because if I don't have it, then nobody else gets it. The fact that we are here, we are a result of that relay race, right? We are looking in the middle of a race right now. We're number, whatever, I don't know how many billion, whatever number you want to give. That's what we are, and people are saying, oh, well, this could have just gone on infinitely. What do you mean infinitely? Somebody has to have that baton of existence to start off everything in the first place. We know, otherwise, we don't have the quality by ourselves. It doesn't just pop in there. If I take a sweet cup of chai, and I pour it into somebody else's chai, it makes that a little sweet too. I take that one, I pour it on. You have to have that sugary start in the beginning somewhere. You have to have a sugar in the beginning which has that quality by default. You can't have infinite cups of chai which have all been, randomly sweetened out of nowhere. No, there's something outside of everything else which has this quality of wujud and existence by itself. Wajib al-wujud. Hopefully that was understood. If you didn't understand it, recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Gotcha. Okay, at least you're being honest. Inshallah, maybe you can, whatever points were unclear, you can ask in the Q&A. Or we can speak afterwards, inshallah. Normally when I do this, it's easier if I have a whiteboard, we draw things out, it becomes a bit easier, right? And I am leaving out a lot of the premises. But again, I've only got some short amount of time. I'm trying to go through a philosophical proof. Normally in a class in Aqa'id, that you would do, let's say if you're in the Hawza or a seminary, this proof, normally they take maybe 2 1-hour classes or 45-minute classes. I'm trying to cram it in like 20 minutes basically, because I did all the disclaimers. Hopefully the analogies made sense. I could do a lot of other ones too, right? You could talk about milk. And let's say you get a cup of chocolate milk. Well, how did milk become chocolatey? Well, you know that there's chocolate, and you put the chocolate in the milk, and that's how you get chocolate milk, right? So, okay, fine. Milk by itself is not chocolatey. When you put chocolate in, that's how you get it. So, okay, well, where did chocolate milk get chocolate? It's from chocolate. Okay, but how did chocolate become chocolatey? Chocolate is chocolate. What do you mean? Chocolate is always chocolatey, otherwise it's not chocolate. So, whenever you find it, we're like God's chocolatey milk. I'm going to put it that way, right? Chocolate. I don't know if that makes sense. Or if it's blasphemy, sorry, Allah. No, but I think hopefully the analogies worked out. But again, if there's any questions beyond that, then we'll try to explain in the Q&A or after, inshallah. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So I'm going to leave it here in terms of the proof, because I think if I go beyond this, it might get a little too intense. Yeah? And more so than it already was. So in terms of our topic, I'll leave it for here. So I think maybe we can stop. If there's any questions or anybody wants anything clarified, or objections, criticisms, feedback. Yes?
I dispute the assertion that existence is a property of a thing.
Okay.
So I would rather think that whether I exist or not, that's the property of the space I live in, the space-time I live in. That's the property of my existence. I am a property of space-time. So existence is not a property of a thing. The thing doesn't change whether it exists or not. The space exists, the space changes whether it exists or not. So
Okay.
does your argument really hinge upon the assertion that existence is a property of a thing?
Yeah, because it's something that's self-evident, even if we're, let's say, going with you're saying with space-time. Does space-time exist or not?
Yes, it does.
Can it not exist?
Why not? I don't know.
So it can be, you can imagine the non-existence of space-time, which would be nothingness, right? For example.
I don't really know about this.
So, right now, you can imagine something that exists and something that doesn't exist. So right now, let's say fire. If there was a fire right here, well, I'd be screaming and crying and burning probably, right? That fire has real effects. That fire is going to burn me. If in my mind I'm thinking about fire, there's no burning there. The idea of when something has the quality, we assert and ascribe to it the quality of being, it's that it has real effects. It's real, rather than unreal or imaginary.
It's weird to me how you're asking me to imagine the existence or the non-existence of space-time when I think the word exist really means exist in space-time. Like you're applying what occurs in our world to itself.
Yeah, because this world could this world not exist?
I don't think that question makes sense.
It
Existence
does.
is something in the world.
No, that's not the case. So, a universe, it can be real or it cannot be real. Don't use the word existence. It's real or it's not real, right? Like I can imagine a universe right now where instead of humans running things and animals being there, maybe animals are running things and humans are like pets. I can imagine that universe, it doesn't make it real, right?
You know it's not real. It's just not in it.
I'm telling you like imagination, right? Right now I'm imagining it, it's not real.
How do you know that? You don't really know that.
Stop. It's in my head right now. I'm saying because it's in my head, does that make it real? Or let me go four-sided triangle. Is that real?
No,
Why is it not real?
because it's impossible.
Okay, so does it exist? Okay. So why can't it exist? So you're describing quality to it. You're saying that a four-sided triangle cannot exist. It's impossible. Yeah, okay, so contradictions, can they exist or not?
No.
So you can ascribe quality to contradictions. You can say contradictions cannot exist. Can you ask the same question about space-time? Does space-time exist? What's the answer? The answer for scientists better be yes, otherwise they got a big problem in terms of science. So you can ask the question about it. You can ask two separate questions about every single thing. I don't want to use the word exist. You can, for everything there is, you can ask two questions. You can say, what is it? Like you can say, what is space-time? What is a laptop? What is a microphone? What is water? What is a unicorn? What is a four-sided triangle? You can ask the question of what is it? That's known as quidity or mahiyya. Then you can ask a separate question and say, okay, I know what it is. Does it exist? That's a separate property altogether. You can describe something and it may not exist. You can describe space-time and you can tell the definition of it, but you can also say it doesn't exist. They're two separate properties altogether. Not everything has a quality or a property exists. But everything that does exist has a way that you can describe it in terms of its qualities.
Okay.
Yeah?
Another thing.
Sure. Let me see if anybody else has questions. If not, then anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes.
I was wondering if you can imagine something, does it necessarily mean that it cannot exist? Like unicorn.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that it can't. It doesn't make it, as he was using the word impossible. It doesn't make it impossible. So, for example, yeah, I can imagine. Sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. So somebody was saying, okay, If I imagine something, does that mean it's impossible? Like it can't exist if I imagine it? No. So unicorn is a good example, right? So I can imagine a unicorn, but maybe we just haven't found it yet. Or maybe it existed and it went extinct and nobody knows about it. That's possible. I can imagine an orange cow. It's not impossible. It could be there, but we just don't know about it. Now, it's interesting, actually, since you asked the question. Can you imagine a four-sided triangle? No. It's impossible. When something's truly, logically impossible, you can't even imagine it. Why? Because our aql, our mind, only works in certain parameters. It only can think of things which are contingent beings. So if something is, we say, mumtani' wujud, it's impossible to exist, you can't even imagine it. It's impossible. So again, like a four-sided triangle, or another thing, like a bachelor that's married. It's a contradiction, right? You can't imagine that. Right? It's impossible. It doesn't happen. Right? Or a person who's dead and alive at the same time. That's impossible. Impossibilities can never be imagined. Our intellect works in a certain set of parameters and rules, and it won't imagine anything outside of it. And that's why the same thing, that our intellect also is perceiving everything in reality with two qualities. It's saying that, look, this is a microphone. I know it's here. But I also can ask a separate question of, regardless of it existing or not, what is this? Same thing with a unicorn. I can give you a quality of unicorn. I can say a unicorn is a horse with a horn. Right? And then if you want to call it a Pegasus, you add some wings. I know all this stuff because I have 3 daughters, obviously, right? So you can imagine stuff that doesn't exist, right? That's why we have imaginary animals. You can imagine like griffins and what else? Phoenixes. Oh yeah. Yeah, right? The imaginary bird. And I can imagine, like I was in a Pokemon and like all that stuff when I was younger. So I can imagine those creatures. I really wish Pikachu was real, but he's not. What can I do? Or she. Sorry, I don't want to assume Pikachu's gender. My bad. I'll get killed out here nowadays. So you can imagine things, and then yeah, maybe later on we can do that. But impossibilities, that will never work, right? Okay. So we're getting to the end of time. So maybe we'll continue afterwards if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. I had actually one more disclaimer before we go to the maqtal and musiba. If you could recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So I mentioned the first disclaimer I talked about was in regards to kids and letting them be free and parent, and us trying our best to be more adult-like, right? The second was that I knew this was going to be a bit tough philosophically, but I was hoping people poured in their attention, and hopefully, again, I might not have done a great job, but I tried my best to water down the analogy as best as possible and the proof. The third is this, and this goes back to actually the first disclaimer, is another reason why people, we need the youth back here, get the youth back here. I said, okay. Same thing, youth have questions. I said, yeah, I know. When they were younger, did you encourage them to ask questions? Those same youth that you want to run back to the center now, were you encouraging them to ask questions? Or when they did ask a question, what was your response? Was it like, na'udhu billah, what are you saying? What's wrong with your iman? How can you say something like that? What's wrong with you? No, this is not what we say. We can't question like this. Or shh, just be quiet and listen. Was this the response? Because if that's the response to somebody who has that intellectual curiosity, that's it. Why would they want to come back to a place like that? If we don't give them the freedom to ask the questions here and get the answers, which the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt have provided, and our ulama have passed down and provided, then where are they going to go? They're going to go outside. Their public school teacher is going to give them the answer then. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In one hadith is reported to have said, if you do not perform the tarbiyah and rushd and education of your children, don't worry, somebody else will. And in one version of hadith says, don't worry, the kuffar will do it. If we don't do it, if we don't instill the identity, they'll say, look, we've got our own identity, and we'll instill it in them, we'll give them. We are all in the same business. Every single human is in the same business. We all have an idea about what is good, what is real, what is bad, what is wrong, what's the best, what's the worst. We all have this idea in ourselves, right? And most of us, when we come into contact with somebody else, we want to pass that along. It becomes something silly to food, right? Like, I love sushi, for example. So when somebody comes and says, oh, sushi's disgusting, I get offended personally. Like, what do you mean sushi's disgusting? It's a private, that's like a personal thing. It's not like a fact that sushi is objectively good. But I like it, and I'm just like, oh, I wish you loved sushi. I wish you had the same feeling that, I got. It's not the case. But that's the thing, we want people to take part in the same stuff that we do. So now imagine, you have us who love the Ahlul Bayt. We're supposed to be proud Shias with this iftikhar. And we're coming here and we're crying, and we're happy, and we're we're trying to spread this message, and then somebody's saying, oh, can you teach me some of these things? And they're like, no, get out of here. Well, it's not going to work. I wouldn't blame somebody who's going to run out of the center. I'll tell you when I was a kid, I ran out of the center, because that's what happened when I was younger. I had speakers, so-called scholars, they just didn't want to answer my questions. The elders would just shoo me away. I said, okay, then I don't belong here. And my answers, unfortunately, were given by other people. Alhamdulillah, Allah helped me get back to the right answers and put me in the path of the right people. But that doesn't happen for everybody. Yes?
So,
If I said no more questions, that's okay.
no, that's a comment, and because I love your lectures and I think you're the right person who's going to deliver this message. My suggestion is we need to talk to the younger people. What is the difference between critical thinking and building an argument and jadal? That's a problem that I see in young people. They don't see the difference between critical thinking, building a good argument, discussing the subject, and going toward jadal. With jadal in the Quran, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advised not to do. Because you see the truth, you see the logic behind it, and yet you insist on doing it for fun, on doing it for intellectual entertainment. And that's a very, very big problem I see in a lot of young generation, is that they go toward jadal, they don't go toward discussion and critical thinking. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure, I'll comment quickly about that. So,
Wait, what's jadal? Explain.
yeah, sure. So let me explain like this. Basically, this is something that's studied in mantiq, that when somebody wants to try to convince you of another point, there's different ways of doing it. The highest form of trying to bring somebody towards haqq and the truth is known as burhan. That is philosophical, logical arguments, right? A, B, B, C, A, C, done. There's no arguing that, right? That's what burhan means. Then beyond that, there's other types of skills or sana'at that are used. One of them is jadal, and this is a bit different than the way the Quran uses it, but this has also been described in hadith as well too. Some of the companions came to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and asked him, are we allowed to engage in jadal al-ahsa? And over there, Imam Sadiq said, no, you can use that. So against that, there is definitely a I'd say honest conversation and research and questioning versus somebody who's like, I just want to test somebody's knowledge, or I just want to make somebody look bad. And trust me, I get a lot of that myself, right? Because there's somebody who's like, he just wants to show off that, he'll just start naming all these books in Arabic, or like, the Imam has said so and so and so. I'm like, okay, why are you doing this? Why are you in front of a whole session to show off all these names and hadith that you know? Like, what's the point? A lot of people are fooling themselves into thinking they're actually after truth when what they're trying to do is just get people's attention on them. They're just like, look at me, look how great I am. It is an issue. But most people, here's the other sort of defense of those kinds of individuals. Because myself, sometimes I'm still one, because sometimes it's fun, I'm sorry to say. But I was like that when I was younger too. And the reason is because when I actually asked the questions, and I was honestly asking, I got foolish responses from speakers and ulama and elders. I said, look, if you're not going to take it seriously, then I'm not going to take it seriously. And again, I'm not proud of that, but I'm saying that is a normal step for somebody to take, is on the kind of steps to research. If they're coming across argument after argument and it doesn't make sense, again, think about the typical non-religious or atheistic person in the society. If they're just looking at the typical arguments that are given from Christians or Jews or Muslims, the religion's a joke then, because they're not getting good arguments. So they're like, this is a joke, then what's the point? And they've heard it all. And trust me, I've been working with and dealing with atheists and atheism for pretty much when I started my house of studies. Even before that, even in university, that's what I was focusing on religion and science, the trend of atheism, modernism, all this. And nearly every single time, it was the same exact answer. Anytime I came and sat with an atheist, ex-Muslim atheist as well, because I've been dealing with them back in Orlando, I've had to deal with a few of them there. It's the same thing. It's because they were never intellectually challenged. When they provided legitimate questions, nobody could give them a response. So I don't blame somebody like that. Sometimes they're able to approach in a much more honest manner than you and I are as Muslims. We're the ones who say we're on Deen al-Haq, we're Ahlul Haq and Ahlul Akhirah, we're the ones who are followers of the Ahlul Bayt. And anybody could easily ask us, okay, but do you have any of those qualities in you? You're after ma'rifat of Allah, right? Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Ghafur, Al-Ghafar, Al-Latif, Al-Raziq, Al-Razaq. Do Do you have any of these qualities? Are you kind? Are you forgiving? Are you merciful? Philosophical, logical proofs and everything. But if you're not living a godly life, who cares? What's the point of it then? You're like, yes, I love and I'll die for Imam Hussein. Yeah, maybe. But if you can't kill your ego for a few minutes in the center because somebody bumps into you by accident, or somebody, annoys you a little bit, if you can't even destroy and lower your ego for a fellow mu'min, a fellow lover of the Ahlul Bayt, who's Imam Hussein to you then? He's nobody to you. What's the point of all this theoretical, abstract knowledge if it's not going to create any transformation? Who do you think would have more value? Just think about it. Who would have more value in Allah's eyes? Let's say that there happened to be an atheist in the Battle of Karbala who said that, no, this is truth, I'm going to fight for it. Versus a practicing Muslim who memorized the Quran, recited Salatul Layl, Namaz al-Shab, fasted every time, and was on the side of Umar al-Hassan. Who do you think would have more value? Would Allah say, well, because you didn't know all the philosophical proofs, atheist, forget it? No. He lived a godly life. This is not a defense for atheism, that's not the point. What I'm saying is that there's something beyond the theoretical discussions. There's us that have to show by example too that, look, I am learning the theory, but I'm putting it into practice too. You have to have both. And even if you look at all the riwayat, when the Ahlul Bayt are putting on emphasis on anything, they said, look, you can take all the a'mal and the ibadat of somebody, if they don't have the akhlaq, the rest of the stuff means nothing. There's so many hadith like this where they say, this person, because of the way that they treated their family, the way they spoke to their kids, the way they spoke to their wives, the way they were harsh with community members, this person's going to be, burning in their grave or in barzakh because of this. Now I know everybody has this belief, oh, we're Shias, we're going to end up in heaven. Let's just say I accept that, we accept those hadith. I'm not going to deny that. I have that belief as well. That yes, all the people who have and believe the wilayat of the Mu'mineen, they will end up in heaven. Fine. That doesn't guarantee that you're going to be barbecued before you get there. Allah didn't say that you get a straight one-way ticket and automatically you jump and get the VIP line to heaven. You might have to go through a lot of difficulties in the dunya. Difficulties while you're about to die. Right? When maut is coming, Malik pulls out that soul and it's very difficult. Then you're confused and wondering what's going on, and you're put in the grave, you're freaking out there too. In the grave, this is where all these scary hadith come from too, right? You're being punished for things that you have done. Then you go to barzakh, you could be punished there too. God didn't say He's going to, just because you're a Shia, you'll get protected there. Azab barzakh? I'm way over time, so we'll have to open that up in the Q&A, but we do have proofs for Allah, but we'll discuss that inshallah, yeah, better than once. Okay. So I'm going to end my rant, but the idea is here's this that I want to get across, is if you really want youth to come back here, or to be here in the first place, then you have to figure out what they want, what they need. And you understand all the issues that are going on. If you're trying to encourage intellectual curiosity, if you don't know the answer, then the best thing you can say is, look, if they ask a question, why do we do matam, or why is namaz and salah like this, or why do we hit our chest like this, or why do we have these rulings for women but don't have them for men? All these legitimate questions, these are good questions. Adults have them too. But sometimes what happens is our ego gets in the way, and when a child asks a question, we become immature, our nafs gets in the way, we say, I don't want to tell them I don't know. So what do? Don't ask questions like that. Get out of here. No, be humble and say, I don't know. How about we go and ask an alim, let's go do some research together. It'll be interesting, we can go learn. And then your child will not only have more of an interest in learning, but they'll have more of a connection to you. They'll say, oh, my mama, my baba, my mom and dad, they're just like me. There's some things they don't know, and they still have learning to do. Wow, I didn't know that adults can grow too. That's an essential quality that all of us need. Unless, I'll make a nice assumption that you're all ma'asumeen, you're all perfect. But yeah, if I'm being realistic, we all need to grow. And when we apply that in our lives, then we begin to see what we call the Husseini transformation, which will bring us to our Messiah for tonight. You can recite a salawat ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So just to give a translation of Jadda. Jadda normally is translated as like just arguing or disputation, right? But there is something called Jadal al-Ahsan, which is a good way of arguing, but it's one step below Burhan, meaning you're not using full philosophical rational. You're using okay, it makes sense, like that kind of idea, based on proofs that most people would agree with. But it doesn't mean you're relying on full philosophical rational ideas. So as an example, this argument by design, proof by design, that's what we call an example of Jadal al-Ahsan. It's a good argument. It's a good thing to put forward, but it's not foolproof. That's why this other one is Burhan Imkan wal Wujud. That's a Burhan because it's offering nothing but philosophical, logical ideas. Okay. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Please accept my apologies. I don't like when the programs go over time, but I just wanted to try to make sure we went through things thoroughly, and then we went through some of these questions. All of us, we wished that we could have been with Imam Hussein. Individuals who, they changed later on in their lives. Right? We talked about Hud, for example. Hud was on the wrong side. But Allah, because of that ma'rifah, the akhlaq that he had, because of his real character, Allah gave him the tawfiq, gave him the doorway, gave him the path, said, look, one way is Jannah, one way is Jahannam. One way is heaven, one way is hell. Either be with Hussein or be with Yazid. You have a choice. But he got that choice at the end. And who knows, many of us, it may be the same thing. Maybe for us, it's only in that final moment when the Imam returns that maybe path, and maybe that's when we get to make a change. But that's not the ideal. A real mu'min, a real Muslim is on the right path from the beginning. Sirat al-Mustaqim always, from childhood. Imagine if we were somebody like that. Not joining Imam Hussein when we were older, like many people did. But rather, what if we were with Imam Hussein? We were close to Imam Hussein even when we were younger. Imagine if we were somebody like that. And they say there was, one of the ashab who was present in Karbala was this individual. And they say he was the oldest individual in Karbala. Somebody who, they say, was almost 10, 20 years older than Imam Hussein. But when Imam Hussein was a child, even then, Imam Hussein was a young baby. He still showed Imam Hussein respect because of who he was. They say once, Rasulullah was walking with one of his companions, whose name was Mubahir. And he said, Ya Mubahir, bring me your son. Mubahir picked up his son, he gave it to Rasulullah. And Rasulullah began hugging him and kissing him, showing him so much affection. And Mubahir was confused. He said, why are you showing my son so much love and affection? I don't understand. He said, you didn't see what I saw, your son did. He said, my grandson Hussein was walking. Habib was following all of his footsteps. Every footstep that my grandson Hussein made, Habib would take the dust from the footprint and rub it on his eyes. So this is a Habib of my Hussein. This is somebody who will give his life for my Hussein. This is somebody who will always be with my Hussein. This is something that you and I wish we could be with Imam of our time as well. And Habib always had a special place in the hearts of all of the Ahlul Bayt. They say, in Karbala, the soldiers, they didn't all arrive at once. We mentioned last night that they arrived, they all had separate battalions. Hur had his own battalion. Shimr had his own battalion. Umar ibn Sa'd had his own battalion. Each of them had 2,000-3,000 soldiers. And Ibn Ziyad, the governor of Kufa, he devised kind of a scare tactic, where he said, once you bring Imam Hussein and his family to Karbala, then little by little, every day we're going to send a new battalion. And what you're supposed to do is, as you pass by their tents, make your horses stomp their feet as loud as possible so we can strike fear into the hearts of the children and the women. So every day, Zainab, Fidda, all the women and children would hear 2,000-3,000 soldiers passing by them every second. And one day, Zainab comes to Hussein and says, Ya Akhi, every day I'm hearing more and more of these enemies, people who are bloodthirsty. They're coming for you. They're growing and growing, and I'm looking at us, and we only have 72 people. Don't you have somebody that can help? That's somebody that you're close to that we can call? And they say, this is where, yes. He said, yes, I have a Habib that I can call. I have a true lover that I can call. And they say at this point, Habib was still in Kufa. And because of the situation, the house arrest that was happening there, he didn't know, he knew Imam Hussein was in trouble, but he didn't know where Imam Hussein was. What Imam Hussein did, they say this was around the 2nd or 3rd of Ashura. Muharram, sorry. Imam Hussein wrote a letter by hand, gave it to a messenger, and that messenger ran out, gave it to personally to give it to Habib in Kufa. This Habib is with his wife and child, and according to some narrations, he's having breakfast. And he hears a knock at the door. And immediately Habib says, I smell a fragrance that I haven't smelled for many years. See, this is when somebody's truly in love with somebody. When they're really Habib, they can tell the fragrance of somebody that's beloved to them. He said, I smell the beloved fragrance of my Imam. And when he comes and he opens the door, person says, "Ana barid al-Husayn," I'm the messenger from Hussein. Immediately Habib takes him and he honors this messenger. Then he takes the letter from his hands and begins slowly kissing this letter, showing ihtiram to this. He begins reading this letter and begins crying right away, finding out the situation, the dire situation that his Imam was in. And Imam is saying, "Habib, ajil, come to me, I need your help, I need your help." Habib sends the messenger off. He closes the door. And now Habib is thinking, what do I do? I know as a Shia I have to go and I have to go defend my Imam, I have to fight for my Imam. But he says, my wife is here, my son is here. I have to make sure they're on the same page as me. So he asks his wife, his wife says, what is this letter? Who's it from? Why have you reacted like this? He said, this letter is from Hussein ibn Ali. And he is in trouble and he's asking me to come. And she says, so what's the problem? He says, I'm not sure what to do. I shouldn't leave you. I have a duty to you. You're my wife. I have a duty to our son. I can't just leave you like this. Habib's wife comes to him and says, give me your sword. If you want to give me your sword, I will go fight for the son of Zahra. How can you say something like this? Habib says, no. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. We had the same level of love and iman for Hussein. Of course I will go fight for my son, my Imam Hussein. Middle of the night, he goes and sneaks past all the guards and is able finally to reach the camps of Hussein. When he does, according to narrations, he reaches there on the 7th of Muharram. They say when this happens, every other night, the women and children have been crying and screaming because of all the enemy soldiers passing by. But on the 7th, they say that all of a sudden, Bibi Zainab, in her tent, she's hearing men cheering, she's hearing the Ahlul Bayt cheering, she's hearing the Ashab happy and elated. They said, I haven't heard this sound in many days, what is going on? Fidda, go see what's happening outside. Fidda goes outside to investigate. And she comes back to her master. She says, Ya Mawlai. She comes to Zainab, says, a friend of Hussein has come. Who has come? Habib ibn Mudahir has come to defend Hussein. And she says, Fidda, go and send my salam to Habib. He's somebody who's been dear to us, the Ahlul Bayt, forever. When Fidda comes to Habib, she says, my master Zainab sends her salams to you. If we ever got this salam from Zainab, we would be so happy. When Habib hears this, he begins crying and screaming and slapping his face. He says, why would somebody, the princess of Ali, the princess of Fatima, how could she send salam to somebody like me? A faqir like me, a lowlife like me. Who am I? And why is Zainab stuck in a place like this, in a time like this, surrounded by ulama and fake ulama and people and soldiers like this? When Habib makes his way to the battlefield, they say it was time for salah and namaz. When he goes out, Imam Hussein told them, go ask them to give us a few minutes so that we can recite our salah. When Habib and a few others go, Umar ibn Sa'd says, no, Imam Hussein's namaz will not be accepted, we won't give you any time. Habib becomes enraged. He says, are you saying the grandson of the Prophet's salah won't be accepted, but you think yours will be accepted? This is when Habib goes back to Imam Hussein and he says, give me ijaza. He said, I want to go and fight now. Allow me to read my salah with Rasulullah in Jannah. Habib goes out and he fights valiantly on the battlefield. They say somebody who's 85 years old goes and fights and kills 62 enemies. But finally he succumbs to his wounds. And according to narrations, finally he calls out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Alaykum minni akhir salam. لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما بأمره صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد